Excellent. Wasn't yesterday awesome? Woo! So while you guys are moving, I'm just going to bit of context for today. So my marketing team tells me that all the speakers here that were chosen are rock stars. So each of these individuals is, in their own way, have done amazing things to either launch or grow or really study and understand how to successfully launch a direct primary care practice. So I'm really excited about this track, and our next speakers actually have really been focusing on looking at ways to set their business up for scale. And so Dr. Alex Lickerman and Rhea, welcome to the stage. The following, I'm really excited about this talk, and have you guys got your mics? Yeah, good. And I'll hand it over to you. There we go.
Thank you. We need a second mic. Good morning. So my name is Alex Lickerman, and I am a primary care physician in direct primary care. My background is I was at the University of Chicago as an academic physician for 20 years and left in 2016 to found ImagineMD. And my job in the company is to run the medical practice and hire doctors and help scale it.
Good morning. Is it live? Yeah. My name is Rhea Campbell, and I am responsible for everything non-medical, so really the business side.
So we're married, so if we start bickering up here, that'll be why. You'll understand the reason.
I am going to argue with him.
Don't interrupt me. Don't interrupt me.
Because I like to.
All right, so we're going to talk, so how many people, how many in the audience are doctors? Raise your hand. And of those who are doctors, how many of you have not yet made the leap into direct primary care? Okay, just one. That's okay. So the rest of you are in direct primary care. So we want to make this talk very practical and try to give actionable advice. So we want to tailor it to sort of the audience. So I'll talk about what we did when we started doing this. My background is that after 20 years in an academic medical center, what happens in an academic medical center is you get pulled into non-patient care activities. And I was doing mostly non-patient care activities, and at the end of 20 years decided I really just wanted to be a doctor. And the notion, though, of doing that in fee-for-service medicine at that stage in my career after 20 years was just inconceivable to me. And so I called her one day and said, "Are you sitting down? I'm ready to do it." And she said, "What?" And I said, "I'm ready to leap into direct primary care." And she got very excited. Luckily, I have a wife who's incredibly entrepreneurial and fearless, and so we just leapt into this adventure together. So where we started was by answering these questions: mission, vision, values, purpose, and culture. And the reason we put this up as our first slide is because I think it's really important for people who are going into direct primary care to understand why they're doing it and what they want to do. So are you doing this because you want to be a single shingle? There's absolutely no shame in that whatsoever, but really just want to have your own practice, have a lifestyle business, have the patients you care for, practice fantastic medicine, be professionally fulfilled, go home at the end of the day and have time to spend with your families and not be on an EMR trying to do your notes at the end of the day? Or do you want to do what we want to do, which is basically create a business and scale it across the country and create opportunity for other doctors who maybe are not quite so entrepreneurial and who just want to practice medicine to find a way to do it in this model, and that's what we're after. So we thought very prospectively, and I would encourage you, if you haven't done this already, to think very prospectively about why are you doing this? What is the reason? And along those, mission, vision, and values, I think most people in medicine, those things are going to be fairly aligned. But purpose and then culture. Right? What culture do you want to create in your office? This really matters. So Rhea's other background is in hotels, and she worked at Fairmont Hotels and the Four Seasons. And the training there, the customer service training there is amazing. And so as we talked about the kind of practice we wanted to build, we realized we really want to make medicine as customer friendly a service as hotels, as 4 and 5 diamond hotels. And so we were thinking very proactively about how do we create a culture, right? How do you get people, if we have an office in Chicago and an office in Amarillo, Texas, how do we get it so that the way they greet people at the door, the way they interact with the patients, the customers, is the same, right? And we'll talk a little bit about that, but it's training. And also it's first hiring the people who actually, the right people who actually embody the values and the mission that you have. And so I think that's one of the most important things.
And I would say, as it relates to culture, when you identify your culture, that is really going to identify the kind of space that you're initially going to build out, the kind of environment that you'll create for the physicians and for the staff that work there. You have to think about all of those things prior to actually engaging in the acquisition of your space, the acquisition of your talent, the workflow, and the environment that you're going to create in the experience, the healthcare experience.
All right, so this is sort of nuts and bolts stuff, but if you've not yet leapt into direct primary care, depending on your current situation, you have to figure out how can you do that. And once you do that, once you get into direct primary care, you have to sort of put on a business hat. And the problem is doctors are really not business people, and they're very risk averse. And that's certainly me. And even though I ran a 40-physician primary care group at the University of Chicago for 7 years and understand sort of how to manage a group of people and a group of doctors, that's a very different thing from understanding how to create a business infrastructure, right? Things like payroll and rent and build-outs and all that kind of stuff is just a total mystery to me. So you need to actually, if you have an office already, and because you may be converted from a fee-for-service practice to direct primary care, that may not be as much of an issue. But if you're planning to scale in any way, if you're planning to bring on partners or W-2 employees, doctors as W-2 employees, and maybe open other offices, you really have to know business. And so if you don't, you really have to take a very strong assessment of your business skills and be very honest about how comfortable you are in that world, because it's completely different from the activity of practicing medicine. So it seems to me you either have to, assess your skills realistically, and then if you don't have the skills you need, acquire them in some way, read, learn, ask for help, or you have to find Rhea, or a Rhea, because you can't have her. But partner with somebody and think about even that, like, how are you going to partner with that person? Are you going to bring them on as an employee of your own? Are you going to bring them on as an equity partner? But actually, depending on what your plans are, again, back to that first slide, how far do you want to scale? You have to figure out what people and what skills you have to acquire beyond just the skills of medicine.
I would just add, if you are in fee-for-service medicine or you work for a hospital system, make sure you understand your contract restrictions, right? Your restrictive covenant. How close to that current location can you open your facility? Can you talk to your patients, right? Make sure you understand your contract and those requirements. And if you don't understand it when you read it, seek legal advice. Don't acquire your office space. Don't do any of that before you understand your restrictive covenant or any restrictions per that existing contract.
And even more to the point around that is that if you're looking to hire doctors, this is
right.
something we've come up against in Chicago, which is that the large academic centers that have scores of physicians that are totally dissatisfied with their lives and want to get out, and we're very interested in them because we really want top trained medical minds. The characteristics or the characters of those different academic institutions are very different. So one of them is actually extremely loose, not very business-minded, and actually acquiring doctors, hiring them from there is easy. The other one, not so much. They have very strict language in their contracts, make it very difficult to actually acquire those doctors, and that's something you want to know up front, because you spend a lot of time getting to know them and getting interested in bringing somebody on, and then suddenly it turns out they're within that restrictive covenant area, and you can't hire them because that hospital or that system is going to be very intense about that and threaten them even with legal action. You've wasted a lot of your time.
So that actually needs to be your first question when you are hiring physicians, right? Do you understand your restrictive covenant or your non-compete clause? And if you do not, may I see a copy of your contract? It sounds odd, right? You're getting to know this physician you'll potentially hire, but they are a no-go if that restrictive covenant is incredibly tight and it is enforced. You do not want to get into a legal battle with a Northwestern Memorial Hospital or University of Chicago. You will lose.
Yeah. And then just for those of you who are already DPC physicians, this is not an issue, but if you're not, and you're, one of the big worries that we think, that we certainly had, and questions we had is, and actually will be an issue as you bring physicians onto your practice, if that's also your goal, is what will the conversion ratio be? How many patients in a doctor's current practice will come with them? And we've seen in the literature anywhere from 10 to 25%. I think 25% is kind of high. I think for me is around 20. It depends on the practice and sort of what type of interaction that doctor has had with their patients prior to that. But it is the minority, right? And of course, this is one of the big scary things is that you're going to leave a lot of revenue on the table when you make this conversion at first and sort of need to build the practice up, which is what we're going to talk about next. Actually, we did that backwards. So capital requirements, right? So the name of the game is getting patients. And how do you do that? We're going to talk a little bit about what's worked for us and what has not worked for us. But in general, the key here before you do that is you have to know what your capital requirements are. Our observation is the practices, in fact, just the businesses that do not survive, it's because they didn't create enough runway for themselves. They didn't have enough savings built up while their business was gradually growing to survive. And so you have to be really honest about your capital requirements. Rhea will talk about sort of the things you have to think about that determine those capital requirements, and as I said before, assessing your business skills.
Yeah, and as it relates to your capital requirements, and we're going to talk about this in the next slide, I believe, is make sure you have made a real clear assessment. Do you need to pay yourself? What are your financial obligations for your personal life? And then you're going to do a forecast on all of your business. You're going to look at worst case scenario, best case scenario, and your worst case scenario you're going to reduce by another 15%. And then you're going to look at that as well.
You want to show them that? So this is a really busy slide, but why don't you take them?
Okay, so this is just to give you a general snapshot. So Hint has a fantastic dashboard that's on the top left-hand side there. That will give you a snapshot of where you are. That's a picture of where we were in year one. So we started with 65 patients. He converted about 20% of his existing panel, and we grew from there. So you can see your active, your enrollments, your terminations. That's, look at that daily. But before you're going to have the dashboard with Hint, you are going to create what you see in the bottom quadrant there. You're going to create a 3-year forecast, essentially. And I would suggest 3 years. So you're going to look at your capital requirement. How much money do I have? What do I think is the highest growth that I'm going to have month-over-month growth? What is the lowest growth? And then I said before, reduce that by 15% and look at everything in between and then understand, do I have enough capital to survive? So that you've prepared for any one of those scenarios to come to fruition, right? As you can see, we have only individual patients in our first year. It took us 2 years to acquire our first employer our first employer group. And the snapshot that you see on the right-hand side is really a fully loaded cash flow of when we started the practice, right? What is it to acquire the space? How many patients will we have? What is the electricity cost? Make sure you line item every expense and then refer back to, again, your capital requirements, right? You don't want to have any surprises as you're building out your office space that you're $25 per square foot over budget on 3,000 square feet. That'll hurt you. So you can afford to make mistakes as long as they're small financial mistakes as you are going through all of this. Don't ever spend a bucket of money that you can't afford to lose if it doesn't result in revenue, right? You got to be really careful about that.
So, and you're going to make mistakes. We made mistakes. We're going to talk about some of those in a minute. And I think the key is just not to make a mistake that kills you. So, take the risk low, test and measure, pilot, that's a great word to use. So I want to talk about how we have acquired patients. And as many of the practices that talked yesterday, we think about this in terms of 2 buckets, what we call the onesies and twosies, or the organic acquisition of individual patients who are interested in signing up and getting a direct primary care doctor, and then the self-insured employers. And so, the way we began was I had a cadre of 65 patients who followed me over from the University of Chicago, and I brought them into the new model, and I had my first appointment with all of them, as if saying we're sort of starting over, to introduce them to what it would be like to be in my new practice. And our first patient appointments are 2 hours long. I just decided that's what I wanted them to be. And in fact, let me pause and say, another issue that I've been surprised to discover how many doctors I've talked to who've gotten into this, not knowing what they consider to be a full panel size for themselves. And I know one doctor who's fantastic and loved this, but actually never really answered that question for himself, and found himself actually with enough patients who he's giving this incredible extra care to that he's working even harder and has even less a balanced life than he did when he was in fee-for-service medicine. So I think it's really important that you start by knowing what does a full panel mean for you. And the way I would figure that out, the way we figured that out was we started with what do we think our service standards should be? How much time do I want to spend with a patient at a first visit? And I thought, wow, I can really design this. I can figure out what do I think a first visit should be? How much time do I need to practice medicine the way I want to practice it? And for me, that answer was 2 hours. And then returns were 1 hour. And as you guys probably know, you can actually model and predict when you have a certain panel size, what percentage of your panel size is going to want to spontaneously need to see you or call you every week. And so you can kind of back into that number and figure out, okay, so if I want to be able to see patients for 2 hours my first appointment, and I want to be able to offer those first appointments within a week of somebody calling, and my return appointments I want to offer the same day or the next day, and I know about 2 to 3% of my entire panel is going to want to, out of nowhere, call me the first week and come see me, how much space do I need? How many patients can I have? And for us, that answer ends up being about 600. And we learned that because as we were growing the practice, we were actually modeling how often are people calling and wanting to come back. We were following the data, and we could actually calculate, well, when we get to 600, which is actually what we ballparked it would be based on other DPC practices and experiences, we realized that actually aligned perfectly with the service standards we wanted to be able to meet. But that's where we started, right? Because that's what we feel we have to always to meet. And so how do we make sure we do that? We didn't want to get back on that treadmill, taking too many patients per doctor, and realize we were struggling to meet those service standards and those doctors were burning out again. That would be a big mistake.
Well, and I was just going to say, those are some of the metrics that you're going to want to create. So as your practice is moving along, you're going to want to create some of those metrics, right? What is the use of service? How often do my patients come? Those are important key metrics that you're going to want to look at. Are they increasing? Are they decreasing? Can I become more efficient? Right? You'll get smarter about looking at some of those business needs as you collect the data.
And again, it goes back to your goals from that first slide, because if you want to grow a practice, you want to be more sophisticated than just having a single shingle and filling up your panel, which is just a personal choice, then it's, do I have the skills to do this? Because what we're talking about is a lot of work. It's not stuff doctors are trained to do. And so if you're not willing to invest the time to learn how to do that and do it yourself, you need to either hire someone or partner with someone who can and does.
So that's an important point. I just want to touch on that a little bit. So the reason that we do that we collect, test, measure, create all these benchmarks, is that as we look to scale this across the country, we're going to have capital requirements. And as we have a capital requirement, we are going to have to prove out kind of where we are, what we've measured, and what that growth looks like as we look into the future. If you're not looking for that and you're going to self-finance, you don't necessarily need to create those metrics. You might want to look at those yourself, but you're not going to have to open the hood of your practice and share it with an outside investor to secure millions of dollars. So again, go back to slide 1, right? What is it that you're trying to achieve eventually?
Right. So with the organic acquisition, sort of our issue was how do we get patients to sign up? And so this was really obviously our major focus for the largest part of the first part of our practice. And our initial strategy was simply to give our current patients such fantastic customer service they would start talking. And so I was very careful. Every single visit at the end, I had a standardized script where I said, we're looking to grow the practice. If you know anyone else who's interested in this model, please tell them about us. And what would happen, this is the other thing really important, so at the end of a 2-hour visit where I'm doing things in a primary care setting that patients are not used to, like asking them about their stress, getting into issues, psychological issues that people don't realize primary care has been really well trained to handle, but because our visits have been narrowed down for so much, we typically have lost the ability to talk about those things and engage people that way. I would watch, especially in the beginning, people kind of skeptical about this, and then there would be this transition moment during that 2 hours where their eyes would get kind of wide and they realize, I've never had an experience like this. That was always my goal, to give them an experience that they thought, I have to tell people about this, it's so amazing, so that I didn't have to actually ask them to evangelize, they wanted to. And that's what happened. And so I would get one person, and then the next thing they'd send me a family member, and then another family member, and then friends, and it would begin very slowly to grow that way. I came into this with a bias that people choose doctors based on recommendations from people they trust. I did not believe that people would get online and maybe read a couple of Yelp reviews and say, I like that, and I'm going to just join that. And I was wrong.
I like being right.
Yeah. So it took me a while, by the way, to figure out that just about everything she says is right. Usually when she would come to me with this idea, I'd say, oh no, we can't do that. Because that's my training, right, to deconstruct and question everything. And eventually I figured out if she thinks we should do it, we should just do it. I will also say if you are going to part with somebody, make sure you like them. You don't have to be married to them. That might be mutually exclusive. That might not work. But in our case, it works really well. But somebody whose skill set complements yours. We have totally different skill sets, very different approaches and personalities. We balance each other. She's kind of a wildfire brand. I'm kind of cooler and more considerate. We kind of calm each other. I calm her down. She juices me up. Anyway, with patient acquisition and the individual patients. So she said we need a digital strategy, meaning we need to actually figure out a way to do search engine optimization, to do pay-per-click, Google ads. We need to try out different channels to see what will work to get patients. The problem, of course, is all of this costs money, right? And we were self-funded, and so we had to figure out where are we going to put our money. So our strategy was, let's start with a small amount of money. Let's test it and assess in quantitative ways how well this works. And some of the stuff is kind of hard to assess, and I'll tell you some of the stuff we did. In any case, so one of the things we did that did not work was we bought advertising on our local NPR station. We thought that's the audience that's interested in this, right? They're going to be older, more engaged in, worried about their health, thinking about their health, a little more sophisticated, understand the model. We thought that would work really great. And so you guys, I'm sure, have all listened to NPR, and they say, brought to you by Imagine MD, a direct primary care practice, blah, 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 blah. And we ran that for a week, and we got all excited. We were driving home one day in the car and heard our ad, and we're like, oh my God, we're on the radio. And we got not a single response, nothing. And so we thought, okay, we tested that, and wow, that's an imperfect test because, of course, we think in retrospect, our mistake was thinking we get anyone to sign up from that. It's visibility, it's telling your story, which is probably good, but we were way too early, I think.
Way too early. Yeah. That's further down the road. Let me tell them exactly what works. So here's what works. Here are the 3 top channels for the patient acquisition, for individual patient acquisition for us. Number 1, it comes directly from your existing patients, right? Ask your existing patients to talk to their circle of friends and family and to recommend Imagine MD. Number 2, it is physician referral. Talk to all of the physicians, the specialists in your community that have and need good primary care and aren't getting it in sort of the PPO or in their local community. Number 3, it's a digital strategy. We've spent $80,000 to date on our digital strategy. Our cost of acquisition for each one of our customers is a little, about $1,000. And our time to break even for each one of those individual patients is about 7 months. So those are some key marketing metrics. If you don't know what those are, you can look those up. It's called CAC. But understand that so you know what you're spending and that is actually working. There are all sorts of other things that we tried that did not work. Doesn't mean that they're not going to work in the future, just that they have not worked for us yet.
I'd say 2 things about that. One is with physician referrals. So this is very interesting. So I was, again, taken by surprise. The group of physicians who I get the most patients from are psychiatrists and psychologists. So people who are in those practices often don't have primary care doctors and desperately need them. And so, you have to think a little proactively. Do you want those types of patients in your practice? Now, my view is I'll take anyone who wants me. I'm here to serve. And so that's been a fantastic source of referral because also I reach out to them because I have 2 hours at my initial appointment, an hour for returns. I am unearthing a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression, a lot of mental illness. And so I'm looking for partners in my community who I can refer with confidence to those people. Developing those relationships with other doctors is as important as developing relationships with other people who you're telling your story to. Because in fact, this is really important, every conversation you have, and I'm sorry to say this to doctors who hate marketing like me, but every conversation you have has got to be thought of as an opportunity for you to tell your story, to get people interested in joining the practice, because you just never know where those patients are coming from. And so you develop over time, you find yourself explaining what this model is, and you get a little better at it, you hone it to a really short, concise, scripted message that hits the common questions that people have, like how does this work with insurance and all those types of things. So you can quickly explain it to people, and you never know, and it's not a hard sell, it's just you're really enthusiastic about this model, you've been reinvigorated in the way you practice medicine, and so you want to tell people about it. And we have gotten a lot of patients that way. If not the person I'm talking to, they tell someone else about it, and I get a call. Or they come to our website. I
think it's very important. I'm just going to briefly touch on the employer acquisition because I think it depends on your market, and I know that we're
out of time.
Yeah, we're out of time. But this is a really important point. So we do go after the employer market. Know your market. So our market is not as compelled by cost savings. The employers, white-collar workers right downtown, they're well compensated. We go through the consulting channels. We look for the innovative broker consultant, and we have developed relationships with them so that they take us to meetings and introduce direct primary care. But we don't wait for the innovative consultant because we don't have a huge number of them in Chicago. We go direct to the C-suite. As you can imagine, right, going into a law firm, we initially thought that, cost of their health plan would be a major factor. And as it's turned out in multiple meetings, they don't really care about cost. And so we have to very quickly switch gears, right? Winning the talent war, attracting and retaining your talent, right? What are the conversations you need to have with them that make DPC a solution?
Yeah, don't go into any of those meetings thinking you know what their pain points are.
Right.
Start by asking. It's like Patient Care 101. Listen first, and then you can tailor your message depending on where they say their problems are, because they don't care about DPC, they care about their problems. And so if DPC is a solution to their problems, that's how you'll get them to engage.
Why don't you wrap it up?
Yeah, okay.
Right.
So the bottom line is, so this is sort of where we finish, is that in general, if you're going to do what we want to do, if you want to grow to any degree beyond what you're just being a single shingle, the key here is you have to have a checklist of items that you're going to follow and sort of make this a standardized way of doing it that you can replicate very easily, right? Identifying office space, building it out, acquiring equipment, hiring staff, networking. And I guess where I would finish is, the most important thing here is the relationships you build. So, replicate our strategy, create genuine relationships with really innovative, smart benefits consultants who are interested in DPC, interested in bringing it to their clients, and connect to CEOs, CFOs, HR managers, in your area. Use your network, right? If you get those warm contacts, those warm calls, you can actually get in there and explain, understand their pain points, explain the model, and then, you got to load your pipeline. The sales cycle for getting a self-insured employer to come on board is really long.
It took 2 years for us to acquire our first employer.
Yeah, so be patient. Set your expectations realistically so you don't get discouraged, because really, in the end, this model works. The two biggest barriers to you being successful is not having enough capital and setting unrealistic expectations for yourself.
Great, we'll be around to answer questions. Thank you.
Thanks so much.